A warm welcome as usual to Africa Scotland Business Network. This is our second masterclass of 2023. For the members in our audience, you should know that as part of your membership, you get 4 complimentary business masterclasses per year. So this is our second one, and it's led by Karin Ovari. You can see Karin in the screen. Karin is the MD of Safety Collaborations. Karin hails from Australia, but Safety Collaborations is based in Scotland and in South Africa, so a truly Africa-Scotland business right there. So a warm welcome to our members in the audience. We also have a few guests joining us in this masterclass today. And for those who have never engaged with Africa Scotland Business Network before, my name's Claire. I'm one of the 3 directors of Africa Scotland Business Network. I'm sitting here in Cape Town at the minute, got my jumper on, a rather crazy background as well. We work out of our member company office called Africa Works. And it's great to be chatting to everyone who's tuning in from all over the world today. Stay connected with us. Stay warm if you're in the global south. We are on all the socials channels, especially LinkedIn, and our social media handle is Africa_Scotland. I encourage you to use this platform to network with each other in the chat. That's what we're all about here at the network. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the awesome Karin Ovari, MD of Safety Collaborations, to run this incredible masterclass for us. So Karin, on behalf of everyone at ASBN, thanks very much for your time and your wisdom, and the floor is yours.
Fantastic. And just to say, I think, we are as a team, and there's 3 of us, directors as well in our business. So there's Nuala Gage, Katrina Kruger and myself. And Nuala is on the call. I'm not sure if Kat's made it or not. I haven't seen. Oh, yes, I think she is. Yep. Hello. Hi, team. So I do encourage everyone to feel free to, put any comments, whatever you like, in the chat, and we'll field them and bring them up as we go through. So it's a joy being part of the Africa Scotland Business Network, and we try to go to as many of the events as we can because they tend to be good fun and in interesting locations, although I'm really looking at the South Africa ones going, I think they really kind of take it to another level, but that's another So yeah, so we enjoy it, and we really want to get even more involved as time goes by. And why is she ringing me?
Because I was moving my screen around. I apologize.
Oh, no problems. I thought that's interesting. So with further ado, let me go into the meat of this conversation. So I am going to, so you'll probably just see yourselves for a minute, but it won't be for long. I'm going to present. So just that everybody's clear, I now can see nobody, so I'm going to leave it into the capable hands of everybody else to have conversations in chats and to please interrupt me whenever it's needed. So welcome, as Claire said, to this masterclass. I think that's a fun name, actually, masterclass. So we have a lot of experience when it comes to this topic, I guess, of psychological safety. We've been working in the industry, in high-risk industry, for a long time. And so although we may not have used this terminology in the earlier days, we certainly believe in the principles behind as any culture and organisational culture, and we do certainly believe that psychological safety is at the heart of that. So let me continue. I'm also going to introduce you today to something called the 4 stages of psychological safety, and this is, we'll go through a little bit of history and things. So this is going to be fairly high level. For those of you who you may already have, some of you in the audience may already have some experience and some understanding of what this is, and others may not. So it's a fairly broad brush, but we are going to focus a little bit on what we call, on the work of Dr. Timothy Clark, from Leader Factor and his framework called the 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. So as we move through this, you'll get a little bit of a better understanding of what we mean by that. But so session overview, basically, what is it? What is it not? Why do we keep talking about it? And because it's certainly gained momentum in the last couple of years, 2-3 years particularly. And there's some hints and tips as to how you might be able to start building psychological safety, or that psychological safety muscle, as I've got written there. Now, we are going to go and use another tool called menti.com. So you can either click on this QR code or enter that code. And as we go through the slide deck, I'll invite you to answer a couple of polls and questions as we go through this. So with the next, and the first one is this one. What type of weather best represents your mood, not moody, typo, your mood today? So I'm going to sit here and wait for answers. I might even try and answer it myself if it lets me, and see where we get to. So if you go to your browser on your phone, type in menti.com. There we go. We've got a bit of cloud happening. And I've got it, can't even remember, where is it? 4932, 4932, and 927.
There are some people answering in the chat, so what I can do is I'll just type those answers into Menti.
Okay, beautiful.
Oh, I don't actually think I can do that. I can't put in more than one answer,
may not
can I?
be able to, actually.
So for those who are typing in the chat, if you have access to the menti.com, I will put menti.com and the code into the chat so you can join from there as well.
Fabulous. The idea is that we want to, when we do activities like this, it's really to help us set the tones. Whenever you're in a meeting or getting a group conversation, it's nice to do a bit of a check-in. Yeah. Oh, we've got a blustery bit of weather today. Okay. Well, hopefully this time with us will help to become a little more sunny along the way here. But maybe blustery is good as well. So it's just a way of doing a bit of a check-in. It's quite a good thing to do when you're, particularly if you're going into a virtual conversation like this one, simply because it gives a sense of where we might be at for the rest of the conversation. And it starts to build a little bit of safeness, if you like. You know, it's anonymous here. Oh, look, here we go. So I don't mean the weather where you are. I mean how you feel inside. Just checking. Yeah. The sun is peeking through. I love that. Very good. Very good. All right. So that was just to warm us up with this activity and to set intention. You know, when we talk about building teams and having successful outcomes, whether it's a meeting or a job or a task, if we put intention into how we do things, then it helps us to take that conversation to the next level. So thank you for that. I'm actually quite sunny, but I should be because I'm sitting here in this privileged position to talk to you. So now I'm going to ask a slightly different question. So you should see, if you do a bit of a refresh on your Menti, and there will be 3 or 4 more of these, so it'd be great if you could use it. So what words can be used to describe nice? So when you think of the word nice, what's that description of nice? What does it mean to you? Yes, I know. Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah. All is well. Yeah. Bonnie, love it. Enjoyable, good enough. What was that one? Good enough, all's well, beautiful, mediocre. As we're coming through with these few answers, the reason I asked the question is because I think there's a little misconception out there that if we have a psychologically safe space, that everything is nice and a little bit what we call kumbaya. All right, it's actually not. It's pretty tough. I don't mean tough as in a hard environment, but to achieve it takes work. You know, so there's that misconception that, oh, well, if we're all being nice to each other, we have psychological safety. Not at all. And even if you look at the range of the words there, how could they be interpreted? Are they meaning that we feel safe to speak? Do we have trust? Do we have a robust system where everybody can challenge? These are the things that actually come up in psychological safety. So again, thank you for the words. So let's continue. Little history as to a little bit for me, and this is just as true for Nuala as it is for me. We all started working together over 10 years ago back in South Africa when I was living there. Well, it's longer than that, but I've been in this world of doing safety, leadership development, cultural change, helping teams and leaders to have better conversations and to build psychological safety for nearly 20 plus years now. And so between us, we have probably closer to 40 years of experience. And so this is just, and even in the earlier days when we were running this, I always sort of felt there was a bit more that we needed to talk about. You know, we've always been around how do we have better conversations, but in the earlier days of behavioural based safety, it was a little bit, oh, it must be at the individual level. So it was very focused at the individual level, whereas psychological safety is actually starts from the top. And, you know, if we're going to have cultural transformation or team transformation, it has to start with where we lead. So that's just sort of bringing you into this picture. I'm sort of in all here it's South Africa, Chad, all sorts of places. So I still miss South Africa, I have to say. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was from Nigeria, and I always get a bit nostalgic. So we've already said we're the co-founders of Safety Collaborations, and we specialise in organisational safety culture. And we are certified practitioners of the 4 stages of psychological safety. And our mission in general is helping people to have better conversations and change the way they think about safety. So let's talk about what psychological safety is not. It is not a shield from accountability or responsibility. So what we mean by that is, okay, well, I'm in a psychological safe space, so I don't need to be accountable or responsible for my actions. That is so far from what psychological safety is all about. But it has to be, accountability is to some degree has to be earned. So what do we do? How does the system be set up to make it safe for us to be accountable and or responsible, or both? It is certainly not about avoiding consequences. So we can't say, oh, I'm having a something day, so it's not my responsibility, or I don't have to be responsible for the consequences of my actions. Not so true. It is not about being nice or hugging or kumbaya. All of those things are really important, by the way, but it isn't underpinned, that doesn't underpin psychological safety. It's also not about, oh, well, we all have to have the same consensus around how we make decisions. In fact, quite the opposite. It encourages a safe network so that you can actually contribute, so that you can challenge the status quo. Now, that doesn't mean break the rules or don't be compliant to what needs to be done, but it does not encourage groupthink at all. Unearned autonomy, and what that means is, well, I can do what I want to do because of my psychological safety type thing. That's not what this is about. We have to earn our spaces to be able to contribute and to get the power, if you like, to be able to work autonomously. So we still need to build up trust, but I'll come back to that. It's not about political correctness. It's certainly part of the conversation. So DEI is a very important component to it. And you'll see in a minute, I'll actually say that it underpins DEI and the rest of it. And it's not always about being positive, or worse, toxic positivity. You know, it doesn't mean everything's rosy. It doesn't mean that everything's going according to plan. We work in the real world. Yeah, things go wrong, but how that is dealt with makes all the difference in the world. Yeah, it's all about trust. No, it's not. Trust is key, but trust is individual. So we need, and I'll show you an image in a minute to help maybe dispel the myth that it's all about trust, and much more. You'll probably have ideas on what it might not be as well. So I rather like this image. I didn't need to recreate this. It comes from the Science for Work site. It's quite a good site. So it is the belief that your environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. But what more importantly on here is that the images here tells you where trust lives and where psychological safety lives. So, you know, will I give others the benefit of the doubt if they take a risk, or if I take a risk? And will others give me the benefit of the doubt? So psychological safety is very much at the group level, at the team level, and leadership plays a very big role here. So what is it? There's lots of descriptions out there. The work of Amy Edmondson has her descriptions. We quite like this description, and this also comes from Dr. Tim Clark. It's an environment of rewarded vulnerability. And I feel to be able to understand what that means, we need to explore a little bit. What is vulnerability? Yeah. As I said, I'm going to interrupt myself here. If there's any questions or anything, do just please let someone know and interrupt me.
No questions at this stage, so you are free to continue.
Thank you. So vulnerability is simply the exposure to the risk or harm of loss. So think about, you know, that could be in a conversation, it could be an environment that we find ourselves in. So it could be physical, it could be mental, right? So it's about how do we bring those two elements together. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So these are what we call acts of vulnerability, and this is a very short list. I'll just quickly read through them in case somebody hasn't got a big enough screen. So, you know, just showing up is an act of vulnerability. Introducing yourself. And I think there's statements here that we don't think of as being vulnerable. But how do we introduce ourselves? Sharing something about our personal life. You know, that one probably is a bit more understandable. Clarifying expectations, sharing personal problems or challenges, identifying teams' weaknesses and failures, you know, being open about that. How do we give our boss some feedback, make comments, make suggestions, share alternative points of view? Being allowed to disagree or asking a question, asking for help, admitting that we don't know, that we make mistakes, that we might share past mistakes, and challenging the system, you know, if something's not working properly. So these are all what we call in the world of psychological safety acts of vulnerability. And I'm sure if we spent more time, we would come up with a much longer list. But we're going to go back to our mentee just now, and I want you to read these 12 questions. And the question you have to answer is, have you experienced one or more of these, what we call breaches of psychological safety, in the past, in the last short while? Right? Normally we say a week, but let's say over the last month. Have you ever felt excluded in a social setting? Have you ever been afraid to ask a question? Have you ever remained silent when you know the answer to a problem? Have you ever had some steal credit for something you did? Have you ever been ignored or in a discussion? Have you ever been rudely interrupted in a meeting? No? Have you ever, and now I can't see them, so you probably can, so go for it, right? So if you answered just one, if only one of those you have felt in the last short while, then it's a yes. And if you've not experienced any of those 12 options, then it's a no.
So continuing on, Karen, if you'd like, from where you left off while we wait for responses.
Yeah.
Some of the other questions include, have you ever felt that you were the target of a negative stereotype? Have you ever faced retaliation for challenging the status quo? Have you ever had a boss who asked for feedback but didn't really want it? Have you ever been publicly shamed or made fun of? Have you ever been punished for making an honest mistake? And the final one is, have you ever been made to feel inferior?
So I have no idea how many people are on the call, so give me a sense of. We've got a few responses there. By the way, this is pretty typical, right? More often than not, the yes is far greater than the no, yeah? And
we
that's
have
really
15 people joining us at the moment and 8
awesome.
responses, so thank you very much for your participation.
Absolutely. So let's move on. These are all what we call a violation of psychological safety. All right? So each one of those, every time we feel one of those things, it is making us feel psychologically unsafe, which is what we mean. And we become very vulnerable. So what happens, just by answering just a yes to any one of those is what we call punished vulnerability. So remember, our description is rewarded, a psychological safe space is about rewarded vulnerability. But what this is telling us or explaining to us is what is punished vulnerability. So one, it activates the pain centers in our brain. So we start to get, our emotions start to come into play here. Right? So when that happens, that triggers our what we call self-censoring instinct. It means we want to go into protect mode. We want to, cross our arms and start to protect ourselves. And then we may even become defensive. And we'll become defensive. And when we're on the work site, if we're starting to feel, have experienced a few of those actually. But when you've been in a meeting and you're sitting there and you've actually just put forward an idea and there seems to be silence and you think, okay, and then somebody 2 persons down comes up and says exactly the same things, and all of a sudden there's conversation. You think, okay, hang on, which bit, how did I not make myself heard? It's usually my reaction. But then you might have other times when you're in a room where somebody's just really verbose and you just sort of think, oh, well, they obviously know what they're talking about, so I'm just going to fold my arms and sit back, right? So all of these things contribute to an unsafe environment and can make us feel very vulnerable as well. Or our vulnerability is punished, more importantly. We're always living in space levels of vulnerability, in fact. So when we feel punished, we are preoccupied then with personal risk assessment, so risk management. So how do I stay safe, whether it's psychologically or physically or in body motion, the way I speak, right? So we move into self-preservation and we go into loss avoidance. So how do I avoid getting into that situation again? So if you think about this from an emotional perspective, we might be going into fear, fright or flight mode or appease mode. So we may end up saying, right, I'm not going to get involved with this anymore. That would be loss avoidance. Yeah. As leaders, we need to also consider the impact on others when we ourselves or our leadership employ any one of those situations. What are we creating? And not always intentionally, yeah, but we can create these unsafe situations, scenarios. So the cost of punished vulnerability, this is from some studies from a couple of years ago. So you can see some of the figures here. There's an intentional decrease from employees, if you like. So 48% intentional decrease in their work effort. Right? 66% said that their performance declined. Lost time avoiding the offender, right? So by avoiding the situation. 12% said that they leave their jobs because of uncivil treatment. Right? They don't feel that they're treated well. 25% admitted to taking their frustration out on customers, which I find an interesting one. Can you imagine? So we're trying to, you know, if we've got a team of people and they're not feeling safe, then who's going to suffer? It's not just them. It's the business. It's the bottom line. It's, you know, the customer base. It's all of the stakeholders that get in part of this process. Yeah. You don't have to answer this question. It's just something to think about. So what does we call this the ladder of vulnerability. So what does your ladder of vulnerability look like? So let's have a little bit look further, because at the bottom of that vulnerability is, do we feel included? Are we safe to learn? Are we safe to contribute? Are we safe to challenge the status quo, which is at the top of the ladder? So we need to have a look at this. So let's look a little bit further. So why the interest? I think psychological safety started to really take over and really became very popular, if you like. The terminology has become very popular, particularly through the pandemic. And so here are some of the trends, right? So through the pandemic, it became quite, and the world's a little bit volatile. So this, you know, where are we living? The conversation around mental health, certainly in the more first world countries, or the Western countries, I should say, right? It's a big conversation here in the UK, and I think it is in many places. So it's become an important component to everyday life. It is the backbone of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the first step of belonging is to feel that you're part of something. There are government legislations and regulations now. So the ISO 45003, which is part of the 45001, which is all around health and safety and risk in the workplace, is very specific around psychosocial and how do we get both physical and the psychological safety aspects in the workplace working. It's become more apparent during the pandemic, as I said, the need for a more holistic approach to workplace wellness, I think has contributed a lot to this. Funny, I was on a call this morning, which was talking about mental health and wellness, and how do we become mentally fit? We talk about being physically fit, but how do we also become mentally fit? Therefore, we need to be able to have workplaces and conversations that makes it safe for us to have these conversations. So, and then, you know, the younger generations, like younger than mine, expect some of this. You know, I've grown, but I grew up, and others who may be more at my end of the spectrum, you know, we sort of grow, well, you just have to get on with it, you know, and put up with bad bosses and leaders and horrible team workers and things. But actually, that's not, people won't put up with that so much anymore. So that's just some of the trends as to why it's become a big topic in many ways. And why does it matter? When you think of the culture of an organisation, and remembering we do a lot of work in this space, so, and I talk about culture of organisations, but it could be the culture of the team. And an organisation is actually made up of lots of little cultures as well. So every team has its own culture, if you wish. So psychological safety is at the heart of all of those. And it governs how we behave and how we interact with each other. It is really important to being able to have cultural transformation. You know, Nuala and I have been doing some work with a client, and we are trying to do safety culture assessments, that type of thing. And the things that are coming out is communication. It's generally the first one, right? It's how we are being spoken to, or how do we feel safe to speak up, or I don't feel safe to speak up. So these are, if you want proper cultural transformation, you think of any transitional phase in any business. If the communication isn't there, if people don't feel safe to contribute to that transition, then there's generally a challenge, and it's a tough road. And so the last statement is this: if you don't have it, the rest of what you do becomes, well, some people say you can't get anything done. I don't agree with that. So I think it becomes more difficult to move things forward if you've got lots of resistance and friction between people and what needs to be done. So some of this is about how do you reduce that friction. How am I doing for time, team?
You are good. We are on, I nearly didn't look at the time. We are on 33 minutes past, so you are good.
Yeah. Gotcha. So we say all roads lead to psychological safety. So inclusion, retention of people, innovation is three really key areas and why psychological safety is so important. A little bit of history here. So the conversation, it feels like it's only been around for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but in fact it's been the first started being spoken about back in 1965 by two leadership psychologists and leadership, they use the word gurus for the want of a better word, Edgar Schein and Warren Bennis. They coined that term back then. William Kahn brought it back to life again around attitudes and behaviours in the 90s. Then Amy Edmondson really brought it to life in her work and really linked it to team learning. So up until this point, it didn't get the traction that it probably needed. And then team learning is really where it started to come. But where it really started to come to life was in 2014. So Google had a big project called Aristotle. And they looked at, I think it was 187 teams across their organization. And some of them were brilliant teams. They were highly effective teams. They really got things done. But the key identifier, and there were 5 key elements of it, the number one thing was psychological safety was at the top factor for high performing teams. So it was because these teams had high levels of psychological safety that they were so successful. Right? So that determined success more than nearly any other factor when it came to high functioning teams and high performing teams. So we also talk overlay, we do a lot of work with teams. So we talk about, well, what is a team structure? What does that look like? And we then map over the top of that, these 4 stages. Keep moving forward.
Karin, before you move on from that one, Claire has put a comment into the chat box. Is psychological safety related to young people's demands of their workplace? There is definitely a shift in expectations of workplace culture in young people. And I think the slide that you had up previously that shows the history of it possibly does answer part of that.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's part of it. So, you know, I think the more recent generations have a higher expectation of being treated decently, being able to speak up, to contribute to the system. And I think they have a stronger sense of purpose in some ways. So, you know, and the expectation is that maybe the organisation needs to help them find their purpose. So I think that all comes, is part of the equation, most definitely. I highly recommend anybody reads this book or grabs this book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety by Dr. Timothy R. Clark. And the rest of this, I'll quickly go through those 4 stages, or reasonably quickly, to give you a sense of maybe why we think it's a very good tool. And he's done a lot of research. He's done a lot of work in high-risk industry. He's led teams in that industry as well. So highly recommend it. So back to Menti. So if you grab your phones, and here is a question. In a team setting, which of the following activities do team members want to do first? Do they want to learn? Do they want to connect with others? Do they want to challenge the system? Or do they want to contribute? What do you think? So just one answer. I always feel like there should be some do-do-do-do-do-do. In a team set, which of the following activities do team members want to do first? And particularly if you're not familiar with everybody on that team yet. Yeah. Yeah. So we're starting to get a sense here. It's generally about, you know, connecting with others is usually the first step for many of us. Yeah. Particularly if we're moving into a new team or into a new environment, we tend to want to hang back, connect, see what it's like, probably before we do some of the other things. And then it's about, well, if we're joining, well, what's my contribution going to be? Okay, so there's a second question. I'll refresh this one, so thank you. Let's go to the next one. So in a team setting, which of the following activities is the highest risk? Is taking the highest risk? Is it learning, connecting with other members, challenging the status quo, or contributing? Really appreciate the interaction here. Thank you, especially because I can't see anybody, which is very unusual for me. And individuals, we all have our own level of vulnerability and what we're prepared to put forward. So again, challenging the status quo is generally the most difficult the highest risk-taking activity that we can do within a team. Yeah. So again, this is a fairly consistent outcome. So thank you for that. So let's have a look at the 4 stages of psychological safety. So we talk about this as in that we say that there are 4 progressive stages. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody starts at stage 1 and everybody then ends up at stage 4. It's not. Everybody's at different levels, at different teams, in different environments. But what does seem to be through all the research that's been done is that they're fairly universal patterns, right? And it's across cultures, demographics, it doesn't matter where in the world. And this research has been done globally. So those 4 patterns are inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And I'll explain each of those 4 stages in a minute. And a lot of that is underpinned by the levels of respect and permission. And the more respect and permission that we have, the more vulnerable we are comfortable in being, and the better chance we have of being comfortable in challenging the system. Yeah. So if you think about this at an individual level, so I'll talk about paternalism and exploitation a little bit further down the line. Oh, sorry, this is the bigger picture. Let's move on. So we say that psychological safety is a function of respect and permission. And depending on the fusion of those 2 axes will depend on where you are on the ladder of vulnerability. So if I go back an image for a minute, if respect and permission is low, so if I don't feel respected as an individual and I don't feel like I have permission, then am I actually part of this scenario? Am I actually included? Do I belong here? Right? So the more we move up those 2 axes, the more we can then move up into, okay, well, I feel like I'm part of the team now, so maybe I can then I can start learning a little bit more and it's okay to make mistakes because I'm in that learner space. Yeah. And then again, the more respect we give and get and permission we give and get, we can then move into feeling more safe about, well, I'm going to contribute more from my experience, etc. And then we can go into challenger. And when we're at challenger safety, it's actually when we say we are the most vulnerable, because this is when we are challenging opinion, challenging a process, challenging the way we do things around here. And to do that often takes a bit of courage, yeah, if not a bit more. So the 4 levels, I'm actually going to probably just skip over this slide because I'm probably going to talk through all this fairly well anyway. At an individual level, inclusion safety is, can I be my authentic self? So that's what's important to me. Yeah. Can I walk into this team and into this group and into this environment, into this meeting and feel I can be me? I don't have to try and be something I'm not. Right? Am I accepted for who I am? Does the team accept me? Can I grow? Am I an environment? And I think this comes back to your question, Claire. You know, I think people expect to be able to grow within teams and with organizations as well. You know, it isn't so much about you've got to do it all yourself and pull on your big belt pants and off we go. It's, can I grow? Can I get better at being myself in this environment? And then once I'm growing, and it's okay to put up my hand and say, I didn't understand that. I'm okay to, I've made a mistake, I'm really sorry. Be open about this, but this is what I've done to fix it maybe, or can you help me? Right? And then we want to start working as teams. We go, well, how do I contribute? So now we're looking at where responsibility and accountability and those elements start coming into this picture. So around that contributor safety, challenger safety levels. So how can I add and create value for this environment that I'm finding myself or in this team? You know, if we're shut down, if we're in a meeting and we're being shut down or not being heard, then we're not adding, we don't create value. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going to spend my time in something, I want to feel good that I'm adding to this space. And then, of course, at challenger safety, am I able to feel that I can speak up, say what I need to say without the fear of maybe losing my job, right? And it could be that severe, right? Or being disregarded or being belittled or any of those other elements here that if we do those things, our vulnerability is being punished and we start to close people down. What also happens here, we stop being innovative. So at company level, because innovation happens when we can challenge things. It doesn't happen just because we're sitting there having a nice time. Right? Innovation starts at that challenger safety level. Inclusion and feeling part of the team starts at that inclusion threshold. And I'll show you an image for that in a minute. I shared a couple of other, there's paternalism. So now from a leadership perspective, there's two other elements to this. Paternalism is one. So from a leader perspective, paternalism is a situation where we have fairly high respect, but low permission. So if you think about that, it's leaders like this do understand the need of leadership. They do lead, right? And they may have good intentions, but they micromanage. So if you think about, I've got high respect, but low permission, it means that, okay, well, they want me to do the job, but they're going to be sitting on my shoulder all the time, or they're protecting me from something and not allowing me to contribute more of myself to this situation. Yeah. The exploitative side is, again, no respect or very little respect, but very high permission. So what we're saying there is, okay, I want your input, but I don't really care about you as a human, but you're making me look good, so this is a good thing. And this can be quite abusive, so it can range from very mild, aggressive, overt abuse, in fact. So there are lots of statements. We'll give you some resources for all of this because there's some questions and things to think about in all of that. Thanks, Nils. I love technology. I can look at my watch and see what's going on. Right, and range from mild to subtle to aggressive to overt. So we need to be careful about this. We need to balance these elements. So we say that the goal is to move the team through the 4 stages at wherever it's at and for any given day, and avoiding those to what we call failure patterns of paternalism and exploitation, but rather be leaders that support this process. I run other workshops with leaders that we just focus on vulnerability because it's a really tough place for leadership, and when you feel responsible for things, to be vulnerable yourself. So, but more on that. So stage 1 is inclusion. Until we move past that inclusion threshold, it's really difficult to get to the next thing. I'm actually going to leapfrog through this. I'll come back to that. I want to show this diagram. So this is what we call, so this is the ladder of vulnerability. It's the 4 stages in a different image. And I think what's really important here is that until we can actually feel like we belong to something, we are in the exclusion zone. And until we can step over that inclusion threshold or help people to step over into that inclusion safety zone, it's really difficult to move up this ladder. It's not until we get to stage 4 that we move over the innovation threshold. This is where teams and companies then become very innovative. People are feeling satisfied, there's satisfaction, people are contributing. We deal with conflict well, we deal with bad news, if you like, at this level. So how do you build psychological safety? The first step is approaching your culture by design and not by default. And I like this statement. Every organization, every team has a culture, but is it the one that you want? Right? So this is what we mean. How do we design the culture within our organization or our teams as the one that we want? Therefore, there needs to be intention. What intention are we going to put into this so that we have what we want and not just by what happens? And there's all sorts of other things come into here like unwritten rules and a whole variety of other elements to building a culture, organizational culture. Second, we need to accept our role as a cultural architect. So how do we start looking at ourselves, particularly in leadership roles where we have influence by leadership, where we influence others around us? Let's have a look at ourselves and what are we doing first? And that brings us to the third level, is how do we model and reward vulnerability? So as a leader, I need to show up and say, I've messed up here, kids, you know, or yep, I'm having a rubbish day today. You know, by doing that, we're actually giving permission and respect to those that we are around us to show up as them authentic self, and therefore opening ourselves up to be able to learn, to contribute, and then be innovative, which I think is a nicer word than challenge, actually, but yeah. So to kind of wrap this one up, we say behave until you believe, but really this is about the culture. How do we become cultural architects? Think about this. Our patterns of thoughts and behaviors in a person is a habit. A pattern or thought or behavior on a team is a norm, and a collection of norms in an organization is a culture. So what is it that we want to design? What do we, or do we just leave it by default? And on that note, I think I'm at time. So there are more resources. There's lots of things you can do. There's lots of things that we can help you with, that we'd love to help you with. There is a QR code up there. Feel free to visit our Psychological Safety Info Hub. We've actually just put a lot of energy and effort into this hub. There's some training programs in there that we'd be delighted, or just simply email us at Karin or Nuala@safetycollaborations.com, and we would be delighted to continue this conversation with you. So that was a bit of a whirlwind. I will exit this so I can see some faces. I feel like I'm talking to myself. And I'll stop sharing so that we're here. Whew, there we go. Any thoughts, questions? Hello.
Hello.
Anybody who wants to put a camera on, feel free. There we go.
So we have a comment from Nicola that says fascinating, thank you. So, and it is definitely a very fascinating topic. Kaz, we can still see your screen share. So Claire, I'm not sure if you or Clint can turn that off or stop sharing. There we go.
I've stopped it. I thought I'd already clicked that. Thank you for that. Yeah.
See myself in duplicate. I was like, no.
That's weird, hey.
That's too vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm forever. We tend to use Zoom a bit more. So, and one of the things I love about Zoom is you can just take yourself out of the picture. Everyone else can see you, but you don't see you, because it's weird. Who sits on the table with a mirror in front of them? Not too many people. You know. So yeah, it's weird. Or conversely, we sit at a table with a brown paper bag over our head because no one turns the camera on. So there we go. Sure.
Karin, thank you very much. That was awesome. It certainly given me a lot of food for thought, as I'm sure it has for our participants today. Does anyone have any questions? We've got about 5 minutes left. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Now's your chance to ask Karin live or in the chat.
And happy, I know people, it takes time to process. Hey, Elias, you're going to come and say hello.
Hi.
Hey.
No, thank you. It was very good to sit in and listen, and there are some takeaways in terms of leadership that we can implement on our daily. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. And we must have a catch up, by the way. Yes.
All right, I wish you.
Got a question.
It's like the team is here, like Kat, Nils, yes, yeah.
Got a question from Nicola. Nicola, do you want to answer?
Sure. Thanks, Karin. Thanks, Noala. That was really fascinating. It's a comment / question. So I've spent many a year in the corporate environment, and I think one of the challenges is that certainly, now obviously I'm part of Firecracker and the business network, so it's a different landscape that I get to work in, which I'm very grateful for. But that emotions are not part of the workplace. That you keep your emotions at home. It's unprofessional to show your emotions. And I think that dialogue is still very much at play in the corporate landscape. So I think, and it becomes very entrenched in the culture. So just a question really on how leaders start. Well, I think it's led obviously from leadership down, but how you start sort of dismantling that narrative.
Absolutely. Great question, great observation. We have to start somewhere, and depending on the organization, I think part of the conversation is, you're right, about the emotional understanding of emotional literacy is really important to all of this. How do we show up? And we need to meet people where they're at as well. So we do, for another little workshop that I run just for leaders, particularly at very senior level, is for that piece about understanding vulnerability, which is why I sort of made think about that today, is we kind of, I think, especially in the corporate world, we've got to put on this face and whatever. And as a result, the conversation around burnout, mental health issues, all of those elements are part of this conversation. It's not one or the other. It's this and that and that and that and that. And so it's being able to give people the conversation. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah. It's not easy to start. And sometimes we have to start with one team, at some other level, so that the others can see it. But I will say this, if an organization wants to really have cultural or transformational change, then it has to start at the top. That conversation has to start with the senior people. But that doesn't mean it can't start somewhere else at the same time.
There is a whole body of work being done on, emotions and understanding emotions. Emotions are our stop sign. It's something that is telling us something is going on in our environment, and we then need to say, do we run with that emotion, or do we actually say, oh, that's an interesting stop sign, which direction do I now turn from here, and what do I do with this? But if we don't understand emotion and we don't understand why we are reacting, are we reacting from a place of fight, flight, freeze or appease? Are we just reacting on animal instinct, or are we going, let's put wording to this? And Karin, you often bring us back to an emotional gem on a regular basis of helping us understand our emotions, even in our team meetings, and going, okay, what is this emotion that we're looking at? Let's dive into it a bit deeper.
And some people won't even think that that's part of their need. So you generally, unfortunately, sometimes that conversation doesn't come until someone's gone into full burnout mode, So yeah, great. Oh, that was fun.
I've just got a quick question, Karin. So, and I'm maybe opening myself up here because I am a manager slash leader of ASBN. And is it so we're still quite a small team, and you make the assumption that these beautiful things in the workplace, the trust, the openness, the great culture, the flexibility, are much more easier to manage for smaller teams, and I think they are. Is it even possible? So I think unless Belinda and Clint and Debu tell us otherwise, I think we give quite a lot of that, those beautiful things that I've just mentioned, to our team. We offer a lot of flexibility, autonomy, we encourage feedback, we're happy to be challenged. But is it possible? Like, I can do that because there's like 5 or 6, 7 people around us at any one time, right? Is that achievable with like 2,000 staff in a massive corporate? Like, how do you even begin?
Well, so a couple of things. So one, I think in the smaller teams, and that's why when we measure psychological safety, we do it at team level, because you're right. How do you change? You're not going to change 2.5, 40,000 size employees overnight. It's just not going to happen. But can you do it in smaller teams? Yes. Yeah. And you start there. So they could, and each team could be at a different level. So there's some tools that we can use to help them measure where they're at. And I mean, one of the resources that I don't know, we haven't had that conversation, how we can give some resources here, but, one of the things is some questions that people can just do their own, a Google anonymous poll within their own team and see what the response is. Or you can go to a fully fledged one which has got data analytics and all sorts of other things attached to it, which we can do, right? So it is very difficult to start, but what you need from this level is buy-in, that yep, we're going down this path. I want to turn this organisation into from a compliance to care organisation sort of thing, right? Now we know that there's a bit of rhetoric that goes with all of that, but at least there's small bits and pieces that can come into it. I think the other thing was at a smaller level, like our organisations, is that it's much more visible when it's not going well. So if somebody's sitting up here, they don't see all that other crap that's going on down here, right? They just think, oh, this is fantastic, right? So yes, it's which end are we at? What's visible, what isn't? And I think part of this process for any organisation is about making the invisible visible. Yeah. One conversation at a time. I like that. Yeah.
Can I use that, Karen?
Of course you can.
As a key statement, making the invisible visible. When we talk about this masterclass, I like that.
Yep.
Does anyone else have any last questions or final remarks before we stop the recording? No, okay.
There's nothing coming up in the chat. Oh, there's one person typing. Oh, wait, there's dots.
Wait, there's more.
And Claire, just going back to what you were saying, you see that
You're
in
welcome,
teams.
John.
Thanks, John.
So even in the project I've been working on, on average, there's anything between 180 and 190 people at a time, and they are often cross teams. But they will have their own way of working together, their own language, their own kind of team nuances, so people will come from different parts of the world, and somebody from one part will bring a specific cheese from their area, and someone else will bring a salami or something, and then the first few days it's all around these team rituals of banter and getting to know each other, and coffee breaks are like these little private intimate scenes, or in the evenings after shift will be somebody has a guitar, but they'll have your own team nuance. But as Karin said, it's how is that being understood and driven from the top down?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's not about them, the CEO getting down into the weeds. That's not what he's there for. Right? That's not what they're there for. But they need to support the process for sure. Yeah. So yeah, and I think it's important here to there's different interventions for different levels, if that makes sense, you know. So what's needed here might be very different there, and that's okay. And it's not about everybody being the same or looking the same, or as I say, you know, kumbaya. It's not about kumbaya, right? It's about appreciating and respecting and having the right conversations on a regular basis, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Karin, thanks so much. I'm going to wrap this up. This has been so valuable. It's going to sit on our YouTube channel. Hope that's okay.
Yep.
So we can further promote this and safety collaborations. Thanks again to everyone who took part in the audience. And wherever you are in the world, have a great afternoon, morning, day, and stay connected with us. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.